The power of budgeting is often misunderstood because it is presented as restriction, denial, or punishment. Many people associate budgeting with spreadsheets, guilt, and the feeling of being told no by their own money. The financial books that actually change lives dismantle this misunderstanding completely. They show that budgeting is not about limiting life, but about directing life. It is the difference between money controlling you quietly in the background and you consciously deciding what your money is allowed to do on your behalf. Across the most influential personal finance books, budgeting is framed not as a technical exercise, but as a psychological one. In Your Money or Your Life, budgeting is introduced as awareness rather than control. Every dollar is tracked not to induce shame, but to reveal truth. When spending is connected to life, energy budgeting becomes a mirror. It shows where time, effort, and stress are being exchanged for things that may not actually improve life. This reframing is powerful because it shifts budgeting from "what can I cut?" to "what is worth my life?" Once that question is asked, honestly, budgeting stops feeling oppressive and starts feeling clarifying. In the Total Money Makeover, budgeting appears in a very different tone, but with the same underlying purpose. Dave Ramsey treats budgeting as a recovery tool. When finances are chaotic, budgeting provides structure and safety. His zero-based budgeting system assigns every dollar a job before the month begins. This removes ambiguity, and ambiguity is where bad decisions hide. Ramsey's insight is that when money has no plan, emotion takes over. Budgeting in this sense is not about perfection. It is about preventing panic and stopping financial bleeding. I Will Teach You to Be Rich offers another crucial insight. Budgeting fails when it relies on constant willpower. Ramit Sethi reframes budgeting as system design. Instead of tracking every expense forever, he encourages automating savings and investments first, then spending freely within safe boundaries. This approach recognizes a truth many books ignore. People abandon budgets that feel joyless. Sustainable budgeting must allow enjoyment. The power here lies in focusing on big decisions rather than micromanaging every purchase. Budgeting becomes a background system rather than a daily struggle. In The Millionaire Next Door, budgeting is rarely discussed explicitly, yet it is present everywhere in behavior. The wealthy next door live within well-defined limits. They know how much is enough. Their budgets are not written to impress others, but to preserve independence. This book reveals that budgeting is often invisible in wealthy households because it has become habitual. When spending aligns naturally with values, budgeting feels effortless. The absence of chaos is the result of long-term intentionality. Another recurring theme across financial books is that budgeting provides optionality. People without budgets often feel trapped, even with decent incomes, because they do not know what is possible. People with budgets know exactly how much flexibility they have. This clarity reduces anxiety dramatically. When emergencies occur, decisions are easier because trade-offs are already understood. Budgeting, therefore, is not about control for control's sake. It is about reducing uncertainty so that life events do not turn into crises. Perhaps the most important insight in Part 1 is that budgeting is not meant to be permanent in its most detailed form. Financial books consistently show that budgeting is a training phase. Early on, it is strict and detailed because awareness is low. Over time, as habits solidify and systems are automated, budgeting becomes lighter. The goal is not lifelong tracking, but lifelong alignment. Budgeting is how you teach your money to behave before you trust it to behave on its own. Part 1 establishes that budgeting is one of the most powerful tools in personal finance, not because it limits spending, but because it restores agency. It replaces guessing with knowing, with clarity, and reaction with intention. And it is exactly here, when budgeting is understood as a tool for freedom rather than deprivation, that its real potential becomes visible. And the story is not yet finished, because the real power of budgeting only appears when you move from understanding it to using it consistently, especially on ordinary days when nothing dramatic is happening. Part 2 is about application without burnout, how to avoid the traps that cause most budgets to fail, and how the best financial books quietly guide you toward a budgeting system that supports freedom rather than resentment. One of the most common reasons budgets fail is over-precision. Many people try to track every cent, indefinitely turning budgeting into a full-time job. Financial books repeatedly warn against this. Detailed tracking is useful early, when awareness is low and habits are unformed. But once patterns are visible, precision becomes friction. Sustainable budgeting shifts from microscopic control to clear boundaries. You know your fixed costs. You know your saving and investing rates. You know what is safe to spend. When those anchors are set daily, decisions require less thought. Budgeting succeeds when it reduces cognitive load, not when it increases it. Another failure point is moralizing spending. When budgets frame spending as good or bad, people rebel. This is why I Will Teach You to Be Rich emphasizes conscious spending instead of deprivation. Books that work understand that humans need enjoyment to stay engaged. A budget that forbids pleasure will be abandoned. A budget that chooses pleasure deliberately will endure. The practical insight is simple. Decide in advance what you value most, fund it generously, and cut the rest without guilt. Budgeting becomes a statement of priorities rather than a list of punishments. A third lesson from enduring financial books is the importance of paying yourself first inside the budget. Saving and investing should not be leftovers. They should be the first line item. When this is automated, budgeting becomes dramatically easier. What remains is safe to spend. This single shift turns budgeting from constant restraint into confident permission. You no longer ask whether you should spend. You know whether you can. That certainty removes anxiety, which is often the hidden reason people overspend. Books like The Total Money Makeover also reveal when budgeting needs to be temporarily strict. During debt payoff, financial recovery, or major transitions, budgets must be tighter. This is not failure, it is strategy. Short periods of intensity create long-term freedom. The mistake is staying intense forever. Once stability returns, budgets should relax. The books agree on this rhythm: strict when broken, flexible when stable. Confusing the two leads either to chaos or burnout. Another powerful insight is using budgeting to buy optionality, not just balance. When you know exactly where your money goes, you can see choices clearly. Can you reduce work hours? Can you invest more? Can you handle an emergency without panic? Can you walk away from a bad situation? Budgets make these answers visible. Without a budget, people often feel trapped even when they are not. With a budget, people often feel calm even when money is tight because they understand the limits and the trade-offs. Financial books also show that budgeting works best when it is reviewed, not obsessed over. A weekly or monthly check-in is usually enough. Constant monitoring creates stress and short-term thinking. Periodic review encourages adjustment without emotional reaction. Over time, this rhythm trains confidence. You stop fearing numbers. You stop avoiding accounts. Money becomes something you manage, not something you dread. Perhaps the most important long-term insight is that budgeting is a skill you outgrow in its rigid form. Early budgeting is detailed and instructional. Later, budgeting is intuitive and values-driven. The end goal is not lifelong spreadsheets, it is alignment. When habits are built and systems are automated, budgeting fades into the background. What remains is intentional living. This is why the wealthy next door often say they do not budget, even though their spending is tightly aligned with priorities. They trained themselves earlier, and now the behavior runs automatically. When you step back, the books agree on a single truth. Budgeting is not about control, it is about trust. You use budgeting to earn trust in yourself. Trust that you can spend without regret. Trust that you can save without fear. Trust that money will not surprise you. Once that trust is built, money stops being the center of your attention and starts being a quiet support system for the life you want. And this is where the story ultimately lands. The power of budgeting is not that it tells you what you cannot do. It tells you what you can do safely, confidently, and repeatedly. It replaces chaos with clarity and reaction with intention. When used as financial books, intent budgeting becomes one of the most freeing tools you will ever adopt, not because it limits your life, but because it finally puts your life in charge of your money instead of the other way around. If these insights helped you rethink budgeting as a tool for freedom rather than restriction, consider subscribing for more deep dives into practical financial ideas that actually stick, and leave a comment, sharing which part of your budget you want to redesign first so it supports your life instead of fighting it.